Hi, everyone, and welcome to Legal Management Talk, where we're covering every angle of legal management. So today we're joined by Mike Mellor. He is a law firm consultant and the founder and president of 742 Advisors. And he focuses a lot on really making sure that processes in firms are optimized and that everything is functioning the best way it could be. And so, first of all, thanks for being here, Mike. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what you do, what your focus is?
Great. Thanks so much. So yeah, I founded 742 based on the premise that, in 20 years in professional services firms, and I tend to see the same three problems happening. The first one is that, according to Gartner, B&B and especially, legal buyers are 57% of the way through the process before people pick up the phone. And in many cases, lawyers, aren't accurately reflecting what they've done digitally. So whether that's an online bio, whether that's, on your LinkedIn profile, you've got folks who, may have done a $100 million deal, but they're not putting it on their site. And because the buying cycle's changed, you used to have 2 or 3 names you'd invite all these folks in, you'd have them, kind of do a dog and pony show, as it were, and explain to you, what they used to do. Today it's different. And so now you're getting 5 or 6 names and you're Googling them. And you're probably narrowing those things down to 1 or 2 lawyers who you'd actually make the phone call to. And so in many cases, these folks are out of the game before they know they're in it. So I help to build processes around ensuring that everyone's, really kind of putting their best foot forward from an online perspective. Second problem I'm seeing a lot is that the audit, the pitch and proposal and award submissions process is just broken everywhere you go. Big firms, small firms. It seems like people are constantly reinventing the wheel. And so, a lot of realizations is lost. A lot of frustration happens. And, just a lot of losses occur that don't need to, because folks are doing things and, perhaps not communicating them effectively around the organization. So that's kind of the second thing I focused on. And the third one, which is sort of aligned with both of those, is that there's a bunch of data that's very informative, but it's all in different systems and all sort of in different parts. So whether that's, understanding, different goalposts of data. Every attorney wants to open a matter. Every attorney wants to bill a matter, for example. How are we taking that information and centralizing it in a place so that we can essentially go to market most effectively? So launched in July, and really excited to continue on that, and excited to be here. So thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. So let's kind of dive in on those last 2 aspects that you mentioned, kind of the pitch development and then the data collection aspect. When it comes to the pitch development, what are some of the issues you're seeing, and kind of the solutions that firms should be trying to fix them?
Sure. It's everybody, as my dad says, it's tough to walk into a group of millionaires and tell them they're wrong. And so, but that's really our role when we're optimizing, what's happening in law firms. But, if you do quick back of the napkin math, say, partners making $700 or $800 an hour, they're spending, probably 1 to 3 hours every time a pitch goes out. And you've got staff, you're paying them, say $100,000. They're spending 5 to 7, maybe even more hours on a pitch, whether that's gathering experience, whether that's making sure that folks are answering things, running that through compliance, et cetera. If you're doing 100 pitches a year, quick back of the napkin math, again, don't quote me on it, but it's between $350,000 and $450,000 a year in revenue leakage. And that's every year, just because folks, continue to send out these pardon the interruption emails. No one's really centralized this information. Perhaps in some cases, someone's on vacation and they come back a week later and they respond to you and they say, "Oh, I just did this exact same pitch." Well, we've already sent it out the door. So it's really difficult to quantify, what that's worth. And when you're spending all your time spinning your wheels, not only does that, you could potentially lose rainmakers, you could potentially lose really great marketing people, but you're not able to add the additional value that really helps you to win the day with these new business pitches. And what I mean by that is, if you're constantly spending your time running around answering questions that probably already exist somewhere, you're not customizing that information. You're not looking at correlations between current clients, understanding kind of entry points and how clients came in. You're not looking at 10Ks and, being able to really research down into, perhaps additional auxiliary services that are there. you're really not able to sort of craft the kind of expert thinking because you're so busy kind of doing the rote manual work over and over again, you know?
Yeah. I think what you alluded to, that a lot of it comes down to communication. And when everyone's kind of, and we talked about this in past episodes in different contexts of, people are lawyers have been very siloed, and they're focusing on their department and what they're doing and their next task. But when you kind of open up the lines of communication across a firm, it makes life easier for everyone, really.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's difficult because attorneys are rewarded for being myopic, being very detail oriented and not really paying attention to the forest. And so it's difficult to kind of be able to kind of switch those different sides of the brain on and off. But, that process, it doesn't just end there. How do you escalate, when a new business opportunity comes in? Is it $1 million where you bring it up to the managing partner and you get, a very dedicated team on it? Are you tracking your win-loss rates to see, how these things are? In many cases, these firms aren't doing that. And by developing a consistency, as you say, sort of developing consistent avenues of communication where everybody is really kind of incentivized and encouraged to sort of collate that information in one way or another, you're just going to win more business. You're going to reduce turnover. You're going to increase revenue, and you're going to increase partner point values, which at the end of the day is what kind of keeps your rock stars, in-house.
Right. And then when you said at the top that, it's hard to tell a bunch of millionaires they're wrong, but a lot of the job is telling, people why this is a good idea, why this isn't a good idea. You should say yes, you should say no. So I'm sure a lot of people have problems with saying no to, colleagues on the same level, colleagues on higher levels, whoever. So, what are some of the ways to kind of, because inherent to the pitch process is being able to say no to things that won't work. So
Yep.
what are kind of the best ways to be sure that you're able to do that well?
Sure. Numbers don't really lie. And so, leading with data, whether that's, looking across your website and seeing, hey, you know what, this practice page looks a lot like this one and no one's going to this one. We've only seen 3 people, they're all dropping off. Being able to use that data really objectively to have that conversation and have those proof points, you've got to argue like a lawyer when you're talking with lawyers. And so, leading a lot of that way, being able to sort of benchmark things and say, hey, listen, when we don't put experience and we're not putting the different matters that we've done, they're similar in this pitch, we're losing half the time. But you've got to be able to sort of measure those things first. And in order to measure them, you've got to collectivize them. So, it ends up kind of being a chicken egg scenario. But I know ultimately the best firms are the ones who realize, hey, you know what? We can't manage what we can't measure. So let's develop 1 or 2, kind of key indicators. Let's move on from there. Let's make sure we optimize those, build those into the process. These things don't need to be set in stone, right? They can morph. I always say, my marketing manuals are always written in pencil, right? Because someone new will come along. They've got a great new idea. It's something that can save us money. You'd be silly to be stubborn and kind of commit to a process when someone continues to find a better way. And,
Right.
it leans on a lot of the fact that, you hire experts to do what they do. Lawyers, I'd never go toe to toe with a lawyer in a courtroom or, on the other side of a deal with them. But, we're the marketing folks and professionals of what we do. We're really good at organizing information, creating order out of chaos, and building systems and processes. And, the more that people are adding to that and buying into that, your experience lists just continue to grow. You're able to code and tag them in a different way where you're saying, hey, you know what, instead of just having a standard M&A list that we now have it where we can code it by, hey, I want inbound Asia M&A between 2018 and 2024. That's, over 50 million and under 200 million. That's a really easy thing to do. And I think a lot of lawyers think that that's, very difficult. But, the best firms are creating that in some way. It doesn't need to be a foundation or NTAP. It can, it can live in Excel to begin with to kind of create that business case. ultimately you're hoping that that's aligned with your financials, and so you can really start to have a better sense of pricing strategy, have a better sense of um, capacity, all those types of sort of HR and financial issues. But you've got to start somewhere, coming into firms, and it's a lot of legwork in the beginning, but going back into prior pitches, every other submission you've done, let's get everything. Let's go through all the bios. Let's go through every award submission. Let's put that all in a single place. Let's create consistency. Let's start coding these things and tagging them based on the type of firm we are and the type of focus we are. For example, if you're an IP boutique, you might have 18x the amount of matters. And so you've got to be a little more granular in how you slice and dice things to make sure that, you're getting the exact right opportunity. Whereas a full service firm, may have fewer matters in that way. So, one size doesn't fit all, but you can't let perfect be the enemy of good. And
Right.
I think that, in many cases, like you mentioned, lawyers kind of, being myopic and being siloed, they're taught to be very, very risk averse. And so, saying, hey, you know what, this doesn't need to be perfect. It's not a legal doc, so it's okay. We can kind of play around with things and figure out what works, but you can't let perfect be the enemy of good.
Yeah. I'm sure a lot of times it can be overwhelming when you think about the amount of data that firms have to process. And then, hopefully they have some kind of system in place that they're able to kind of collate all that. But if they're just, getting the idea now and just starting out, then I'm sure it can be intimidating to try to think about what do we need to collect first, what do we need to process first, and then where do we go from there?
That's right. That's right. Everyone's looking for that single source of truth. So the more you can integrate that, where the HR folks are speaking from the same playbook, as it were, as the financial folks, as the marketing folks, it's probably a little easier in the smaller firms, frankly, where, a lot of these things are in people's heads. And if you can get them where you're getting, I find that, during this pitch process is really where you're getting a lot of this information. If you give someone a blank sheet of paper, they're much less likely to respond. To your point, very daunting, right? But you give them 5 or 6 matters, they say, oh, here's 3 or 4 more. And they've got kind of a little momentum going. And, you might send that draft to someone else and you get 2 more. And, as long as, the marketing teams internally continue to kind of create a consistent process, every day you're getting a couple of different matters, and all of a sudden people start, winning will do a lot to change a culture. And so,
Yes.
You have 10 or 12 of these things, and all of a sudden you win a couple of these deals, and people say, you know what, I understand now why, even though I thought it was an irrelevant matter, it was only $15,000 for a small Netflix deal. Well, great. Well, we're pitching, NBCU right now, and it really does matter when you're pitching a peer group, or you're pitching, something that's exactly the same. So seemingly small things, you don't know how clients and attorneys are kind of going out to the market. It could be by industry. It could be by an issue. It could be, sort of primary with a, say it's an M&A with a data component. You don't know what's going to happen when you pick up the phone. It's the most exciting part of kind of sitting on the administrative side, is that, every phone call is different. You're not, always doing litigation and always talking to litigators or always talking to L&E partners. It's always different. And so being able to really see the forest and having attorneys understand the importance of that, it's like, help us help you, right? And the winning goes a long way in achieving that change.
Yeah. And to that point of really making sure you have the data and refined pitch, it also comes back to, across a firm, I'm sure this is harder the larger the firm is, of not replicating what you've already done and making sure everyone's on the same page and there's someone who remembers, oh, this happened, go pull this from here instead of starting from scratch. And so what are kind of the ways that firms can make sure everybody knows the baseline and doesn't have to do extra work for no reason?
Yeah. No, it's the age-old question, right? And you've got to think about consequence, unintended consequence. In many cases, it's the legal world has changed. There's so many more laterals happening, right, than they used to happen. And so, in a sense, knowledge is power. And so, attorneys may not want to share their contacts. Hey, you know what? I worked really hard to develop these contacts in this particular area. I don't want them going around the firm. Well, a lot of firms are investing millions of dollars in CRM systems, and the attorneys aren't using them because they want a little bit of leverage at the end of the year to say, hey, you know what? I need an X% raise, or I've got an advantage here. Well, the best firms are realizing, hey, having attorneys input, lunch dates and these things, it's A, they're not going to do it because it's not billable, and B, they maybe not incentivize to do that. Well, those types of things you really need to automate. You need to take them out of the hands of the attorneys. There are some great technologies out there that can, understand, without looking at the contents of emails, and you've got attorney-client privilege and all that, but it's just in simply looking at metadata to understand, hey, you know what, Jenny is actually very close with this person because we see them contacting each other a lot, even if we're not looking at the contents of that email. We're able to understand, who's got the really strong relationships in particular companies. Maybe that's enough, right? We don't need to know, that we don't need to be so big brother to know that, hey, Joe went to lunch and then he went here and he did. We just know that Joe and Jenny are very tight. Okay, well, what can we do with that information? So kind of picking your spots. I talk a lot about the goalposts of data that, we always know that the two things attorneys want to do, they want to open a matter and they want to build that matter. So can every time that we open a matter, instead of them filling out the same, to your point, the same information over and over again, it's another Netflix matter, here's their address, have these things auto-populate. Great. Now, the second they fill this out, we've got all that system. We've just taken 5 minutes out of their life to make it easier. But what we can do is we can ask one or two different questions that can help us to inform us, maybe in that matter opening process. And maybe they didn't tell the marketing department about, they might call it Project Sunshine, a particular matter. But, when they go to invoice the client and bill them, they're explaining to them, hey, you know what? We did trademark clearance work in Cambodia for a lipstick, for example, lipstick. Mm-hmm. Okay, great. Well, I didn't know that. I didn't know that was Project Sunshine, but now somebody can do the math here, right? Can we get extractions of that invoicing to perhaps go into a data lake, something that, is tied to that client and matter number where, I then at least can search something and say, hey, have we done trademark work that says, oh, well, we explained to someone that we did trademark work in Cambodia. Great. Well, now we've saved that time from the lawyers. They really benefit from that because, I can't tell you how many times I get a phone call 10 minutes before a meeting. Someone saying, what do we do in fashion? What do we do in cosmetics in the trademark space? And, melts my heart when we're able to, pull that thing in 15 seconds and fire that over to them and say, hey, listen, this was Jenny and Jill over here in Atlanta. She actually did a bunch of work with Mac, and this person did a bunch of work with this. And it's those types of wins that continue to get you a seat at the table. And it continues to kind of sear into people's brains. Hey, you know what? This is a really impactful, little bullet list that Mike provided to me. It makes sense. Now I know why he needs that. And so the more that these things can happen, you're kind of greasing the wheels. And that's how you change a culture. You can't do it all at once. A funny little aside, people love failure stories. I remember one of my first days as a CMO, I saw this broken process and I said, oh, I've got the answer. This is great. And so I tried to, institute some firm-wide policy. I'm still hearing the chuckling from, down the hall with the lawyers saying, who is this guy? Trying to say, and, you have to understand the importance of, explaining these things right, getting the right people on board, see that value, and helping them to affect the change with you. It's lonely to try to sit there and convince, 100 different attorneys, but you can get 5 or 6 really key folks on board because you won them business because of the way you're doing things. People are much more likely to listen, and you're much more likely to get the consensus you need to then sort of affect that firm-wide change.
Right. As much as it'd be nice to have that instant win,
magic wand,
and the magic wand, it is a process. And yeah, I mean, as you were saying, like with the lateral thing, that you're right, like on its face, there's not a lot of incentive for the lawyer to provide other information. But again, it's help us help you, that, your information helps the firm, which helps you in return and gives better client service. So it all just kind of wraps in a bow of the kind of that's the incentive there.
That's right. And then when I kind of came into legal marketing, I realized that it's less about the marketing and more about the change agent, right? It's more about kind of convincing people and getting them on board with things, no matter what it is. It's getting everybody rowing in the same direction is probably more important than whether you choose, option A or option B. It's, hey, we should choose one of these, right? That's probably the more important decision is, people agree, hey, we all agree that there's a problem here. We all agree that something needs to change. And when you can do that, the sky's the limit. But, it's getting people to understand, hey, there's a real benefit in this for you. You're going to win more business. You're going to get stickier clients, and you're going to get longer term clients. And everyone loves that. Everyone loves long-term clients that are happy. So we can all agree there.
Exactly. Well, I'm sure there are so many other processes that we could also talk about, but with only so much time here, I'm really glad that we got to kind of explore that pitch development process and how to make it better. So I really appreciate your insight, and hopefully things will keep improving in firms everywhere.
Yeah, the industry is in a very exciting place, and can't wait to see what the future holds. And we really appreciate you taking my time. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks so much to our viewers and subscribers for tuning in. Please be sure to give us a like, subscribe to our YouTube channel, leave us a comment, or you can find us anywhere that you get your podcasts. And as always, you can learn more about ALA at alanet.org. Until next time.